The blistering summer sun beat down mercilessly on Eliza Rose's back as she drove the rusty plow through the unyielding soil of her newly purchased land. Sweat trickled down her temples, soaking the collar of her faded blue work dress, but determination kept her moving forward despite the whispers that followed her like shadows through the dusty streets of Cottonwood Springs. It was 1878, and a woman with dreams of running her own farm in Arizona Territory was nothing short of scandalous. "You're wasting your time and money, Miss Rose," Mr. Fenton, the general store owner, had declared loudly when she'd purchased seeds just yesterday. "This land ain't meant for farming, especially not by some city girl playing at being a farmer. You'll be crawling back to your daddy in Philadelphia before the first frost." The laughter that followed had stung, but Eliza had straightened her spine and paid for her supplies without comment. At 22, she had endured enough mockery to last a lifetime. After her parents' death from influenza 2 years prior, she had discovered her father's substantial gambling debts, leaving her with nothing but a modest inheritance from her maternal grandmother. Rather than accept a loveless marriage proposal from her father's business associate, a man 30 years her senior, she had chosen freedom in the West. The plow struck a rock, jolting Eliza from her thoughts and nearly sending her sprawling into the dirt. Her mule, Benjamin, snorted in protest as the harness yanked against his shoulders. "I know, Ben, I know," she soothed, wiping her brow with her sleeve. "Just a little longer, then we'll rest." The 5 acres she'd purchased were situated along a small creek that fed into the Verd River, making it one of the few potentially fertile plots in the area. While the locals insisted the land was unsuitable for anything but grazing, Eliza had studied agricultural journals and believed otherwise. With proper irrigation and crop selection, she could make this work. She had to make this work. The distant sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road skirting her property. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the brilliant azure sky. Eliza squinted, shielding her eyes with one hand. The town sheriff, perhaps, coming to offer more unsolicited advice. Or maybe one of the Henderson brothers who'd been eyeing her land since she arrived 3 weeks ago. As the rider drew closer, she recognized neither. Tall and broad-shouldered, the man sat easy in his saddle, as if born there. His dun-colored horse kicked up little puffs of dust as they approached at an unhurried pace. Eliza gripped the plow handles tighter, suddenly aware of her isolation. The stranger tipped his hat as he reached the edge of her field. "Afternoon, madam." Eliza nodded cautiously, noting the man's weathered face, probably somewhere in his late 20s. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and though he carried a pistol on his hip, he made no threatening moves. "Levi Jackson," he introduced himself. "Just passing through. Couldn't help but notice you working this field." His eyes, the clear blue of a mountain lake, surveyed her efforts with interest rather than the usual derision. "Eliza Rose," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "And yes, I am working my field." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Might be easier with a proper team. Benjamin is all I have at present," she said, patting the mule's flank. "We manage." Levi dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to a nearby post. He approached slowly, respectfully keeping some distance between them. "Mind if I take a look at your setup?" Eliza hesitated. Experience had taught her to be wary of strangers, especially men who appeared too helpful, yet something in his direct gaze suggested honesty. "I suppose," she conceded, stepping back. Levi crouched to examine the plow, running his hand along the blade. "This is a good piece, but it's set too deep for this soil. You're fighting the land instead of working with it." He glanced up. "With a few adjustments and the right approach, you might surprise everyone." "You know about farming." Eliza couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. He stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Grew up on a farm in Missouri before taking to droving cattle. Not much call for planting on the trail, but some things you don't forget." Before she could respond, the crack of a rifle shot split the air. Benjamin brayed in terror, nearly upending the plow as he reared back. Levi's hand went instinctively to his sidearm as he scanned the horizon. "Get down." He commanded, moving swiftly to position himself between Eliza and the direction of the shot. Heart hammering, Eliza crouched low. "Who would, Rose?" a voice bellowed from the distance. "This is your final warning. This land ain't for farming. Sell it now or there won't be a next time." Through the settling dust, Eliza could make out 3 riders retreating toward the foothills, one holding a rifle aloft. "The Henderson brothers," she whispered, anger replacing fear. "They've been trying to scare me off since I arrived." Levi's jaw tightened as he watched the men disappear. "Cowards shooting from a distance." He turned to her, concern evident in his features. "Miss Rose, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said, though her hands trembled slightly. "This isn't the first time they've tried to frighten me. Last week they poisoned my water barrel." Levi's expression darkened. "And the sheriff claims his hands are tied without proof." Eliza straightened her skirts. "The Hendersons want this land for cattle grazing access to the creek. They've made it clear they don't intend to let a woman, especially one trying to farm, stand in their way." "And yet here you are," Levi observed, a note of admiration in his voice. "Here I am," she agreed, returning to the plow, "and here I intend to stay." Levi watched her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Miss Rose, I was planning to continue north tomorrow, but it seems you could use an extra hand." He gestured to the field. "And I know a thing or two about breaking soil." Suspicion flared. "I can't pay you, Mr. Jackson. I'm not asking for payment," he said. "Just a place to camp and perhaps a meal. In exchange, I'll help get this field properly plowed before I move on." Eliza studied him. Common sense told her to refuse to trust no one, especially not a drifting cowboy with no obvious reason to help, but practicality argued otherwise. She needed this field plowed before the planting window closed, and Benjamin alone wasn't enough. "One day," she said finally. "We'll see how it goes." Levi nodded, a smile spreading across his sun-browned face. "One day it is, Miss Rose. I'll fetch my horse and we can get started properly." As he walked away, Eliza wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake or found an unexpected ally. Either way, she sensed that her life in Cottonwood Springs had just become considerably more complicated. By sunset, Eliza's arms ached from guiding the plow, but for the first time since arriving in Arizona territory, she felt a flicker of hope. With Levi's horse paired with Benjamin, they had managed to plow nearly an acre more progress than she'd made in the previous 3 days combined. "We should stop while there's still light," Levi called, bringing the team to a halt. "The animals need rest, and so do you." Eliza wiped her brow, reluctant to quit despite her exhaustion. "Just a little more, the land will still be here tomorrow," he said gently. "No sense working yourself or the animals to collapse." She couldn't argue with his logic, though stopping felt like admitting defeat. "Very well, I should tend to supper then." As they walked toward her modest cabin, Eliza became acutely aware of her appearance, hair escaping its braid, dress stained with sweat and dirt. In Philadelphia, she would have been mortified to be seen in such a state, but here it felt like a badge of honor. Her cabin was small but solidly built, purchased from a discouraged homesteader heading back east. A vegetable garden, still in its infancy, stretched behind the structure, protected by a crude fence to keep out rabbits and deer. "You can water the animals at the creek," she instructed. "I'll prepare something to eat." While Levi tended to their 4-legged companions, Eliza quickly washed her face and hands in the basin by the door, then set about preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of her dried venison. It wasn't much, but after a day of hard labor, even modest fare would taste like a feast. When Levi returned, he respectfully waited outside until she invited him in. The small interior of the cabin suddenly seemed even smaller with his tall frame filling the doorway. "It's not much," she said, gesturing to the table set with mismatched plates. "It's more than I usually get on the trail," he replied, removing his hat before taking a seat. "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before curiosity got the better of Eliza. "You mentioned you were a drover. Are you with a cattle outfit?" Levi shook his head. "Not anymore. I rode with the Bartlett outfit for 3 years, driving herds from Texas to Kansas. Decided to strike out on my own last spring." "Heading where?" she asked. "North, eventually." Montana, maybe. Heard there's good land up there for those willing to work it. He studied her for a moment. What brought you all the way from Philadelphia to this particular patch of Arizona? Eliza hesitated, unused to sharing her personal history. Necessity, primarily. After my parents died, I discovered we weren't as financially secure as I'd believed. She pushed a bean around her plate. The alternatives were unappealing. So you decided to become a farmer in one of the most challenging territories in the country. There was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. My grandmother grew up on a farm in upstate New York, Eliza explained. She taught me about growing things before she passed. I've always found peace in working the soil. She met his gaze steadily. And I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's. Levi nodded slowly. I can understand that. He took a sip of water, but farming here isn't like farming in New York. The soil, the rainfall, the growing season, it's all different. I've been studying, she said defensively. Agricultural journals, regional planting guides. I know it won't be easy, but it's not impossible. No, he agreed, not impossible, just harder than most would attempt, especially alone. The word hung between them, alone. It was both her greatest fear and her current reality. I won't always be alone, she said with more confidence than she felt. Once I prove this land can yield crops, I'll hire help, perhaps even find a partner eventually. Levi's eyes crinkled at the corners. A business partner, Eliza felt a flush creep up her neck. Perhaps, or... Well, time will tell. After supper, Levi insisted on sleeping in the small lean-to that housed her tools rather than imposing on her hospitality further. As Eliza prepared for bed in the privacy of her cabin, she found herself contemplating her unexpected guest. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the volatility she'd encountered since arriving in Cottonwood Springs. She extinguished her lamp and climbed into bed, listening to the night sounds through her open window, the gentle burble of the creek, the chorus of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. For the first time in weeks, she fell asleep without worry gnawing at her thoughts. Morning arrived with the first tentative rays of sunlight streaming through her window. Eliza rose quickly, eager to make the most of the day. To her surprise, she found Levi already outside, tending to the animals and checking the plow's fittings. You're up early, she remarked, carrying a pot of coffee and 2 tin cups. Old habits, he replied, accepting the offered cup gratefully. Thought I'd make sure everything was ready to go. They worked steadily through the morning, the plow cutting deep furrows into the earth. With Levi's guidance, Eliza learned to read the soil to adjust the plow's depth, to guide the animals with gentle but firm commands. By midday, they had doubled yesterday's progress. As they paused to rest and eat a simple lunch of bread and cheese in the shade of an old cottonwood tree, Eliza found herself studying Levi's profile. There was a quiet competence about him that she found oddly comforting. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked abruptly. Levi turned to her, one eyebrow raised. "Does there need to be a reason beyond the one I gave? In my experience, men rarely offer assistance without expecting something in return." He considered this, taking a bite of bread before answering. "My mother tried to keep our farm going after my father died. No one would help her, said a woman had no business trying to run a farm alone." His eyes grew distant with memory. "We lost everything, had to sell to a neighbor for less than half what it was worth." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. Levi shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but when I saw you out here fighting that plow with nothing but determination and a stubborn mule," he smiled. "Let's just say I'd like to see at least one stubborn woman succeed where my mother couldn't." Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders approached from the direction of town, the Henderson brothers, this time making no attempt to hide their presence or intentions. Levi rose slowly, positioning himself slightly in front of Eliza without being obvious about it. "Trouble," he murmured. The lead rider, a heavyset man with a thick mustache and cold eyes, reined his horse to a stop several yards away. "Well, well. Seems our little farmer girl found herself some help." His gaze shifted to Levi. Don't believe we've been introduced, stranger. Levi Jackson, he replied evenly. Just passing through. Clyde Henderson, the man said. These are my brothers, Frank and Wesley. We own the Double H Ranch north of here, he gestured broadly. This here is cattle country, Mr. Jackson, not farming land. Seems Miss Rose disagrees, Levi observed. Clyde's expression hardened. Miss Rose is a fool who doesn't understand how things work out here. This land sits right on our cattle route to water. We've used this passage for 15 years. The land was for sale, Eliza interjected, stepping forward. I purchased it legally. If you wanted it, you should have bought it yourself. Now, why would I buy what I've always used for free? Clyde sneered. Listen carefully, girl. That warning shot yesterday was just that, a warning. Next time we won't be aiming at the dirt. Levi's hand drifted casually toward his holster. Threatening a woman seems mighty low, even for cattle men. The youngest Henderson, Wesley, spoke up. We ain't threatening nobody, just explaining how things are. Looks like a threat from where I'm standing, Levi countered. 3 armed men confronting a woman on her own property. Clyde's eyes narrowed. You planning on staying around long enough to make this your fight, cowboy? Long enough, Levi replied with deceptive mildness. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the snorting of horses and the distant cry of a hawk. Finally, Clyde jerked his head at his brothers. We'll be seeing you around, Miss Rose, he said, turning his horse. Think hard about what I said. Some fights ain't worth the cost. As they rode away, Eliza released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They won't stop, she said quietly, not until they drive me out or… She couldn't finish the thought. Levi watched the retreating figures with a grim expression. Men like that understand only one thing: strength. They'll keep pushing until they meet resistance they can't overcome. What am I supposed to do? I can't match their force. No, he agreed, but you don't have to face them alone. He turned to her, decision clear in his eyes. I think I'll be extending my stay in Cottonwood Springs, just until we get this field ready for planting. Relief and gratitude washed over Eliza, though she tried not to show just how desperately she welcomed his offer. I thought you were in a hurry to get north. Montana's been there a long time, he said with a slight smile. It'll wait a bit longer. They returned to work, but Eliza found her thoughts repeatedly straying to her unexpected defender. Levi Jackson was becoming more than a temporary ally. He was quickly becoming her only friend in this hostile territory. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comfort could lead to dependence, and Eliza had sworn never to depend on anyone but herself again. Yet as they worked side by side until the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, she couldn't deny the sense of rightness she felt in his company. It wasn't just his knowledge or his strength, but the respect with which he treated her, not as a foolish woman playing at farming, but as a person with dreams worth fighting for. By week's end, they had plowed the entire 5 acres, and Eliza's muscles ached with a satisfying weariness. Standing at the edge of her field as the setting sun painted the freshly turned soil in shades of gold and amber, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd experienced before. It's beautiful, she murmured. Levi, standing beside her, nodded. Good, honest work always is. They had settled into an easy routine over the past days. Levi continued to sleep in the lean-to, though Eliza had insisted on providing him with proper bedding. Each morning, they would rise before dawn, share a simple breakfast, and work until the heat of midday forced them to seek shade. Afternoons were spent preparing the irrigation channels that would direct water from the creek to the fields, and evenings were devoted to planning the layout of crops. During those quiet evenings, seated at her small table with agricultural journals spread between them, Eliza had learned more about her enigmatic helper. Raised on a struggling farm in Missouri, he had left home at 17 after his mother remarried a man who resented his presence. He'd worked as a ranch hand, a drover, occasionally as a scout for army patrols, though he spoke little of that time. He loved horses, preferred open skies to town buildings, and carried a battered copy of Walden in his saddlebag, a gift from a schoolteacher who had recognized his intelligence and encouraged his reading. In turn, she had shared more of her own story, her sheltered upbringing in Philadelphia society, her mother's gentle guidance, her father's descent into gambling and debt after her mother fell ill. She told him of the betrayal she'd felt upon discovering that the life she had believed secure was built on borrowed money and false pretenses. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being foolish," she admitted as they walked back toward the cabin in the fading light. "Everyone in town seems certain I'll fail." "People fear what challenges their understanding of the world," Levi replied. "A woman choosing independence over security, farming over proper society pursuits, it makes them question their own choices. Or perhaps they simply recognize reality," Eliza sighed. "This is hard country." "Maybe they're right about its unsuitability for farming." Levi stopped, turning to face her. "Do you believe that?" She considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I believe with the right approach, this land can be productive. The soil is richer than it appears, especially near the creek, with proper crop rotation and irrigation." "Then that's your answer," he said simply. "You're not being foolish, you're being visionary. There's a difference." His faith in her plan, so at odds with the skepticism she'd faced since arriving, warmed her more than she cared to admit. As they continued toward the cabin, their hands brushed accidentally, sending an unexpected jolt through Eliza's arm. She pulled away quickly, disturbed by her reaction. "I should start supper," she said, hurrying ahead. Later, as they ate their meal in companionable silence, Eliza found herself studying Levi's hands, strong, capable hands that had worked alongside hers without complaint. Hands that had adjusted her grip on the plow with gentle guidance, that had built a better fence around her garden in spare moments, that had somehow begun rebuilding her confidence along with her farm. "I need to go into town tomorrow," she announced, breaking the silence. "We're running low on supplies, and I should deposit the last of my funds at the bank before starting the planting." Levi nodded. "I'll accompany you. After those Henderson boys' threats, it's better not to go alone." "You don't need to," she began. "I know I don't need to," he interrupted gently. "I want to. Besides, I could use a few things myself." The ride into Cottonwood Springs the next morning was pleasant despite Eliza's apprehension about facing the townsfolk. The spring air carried the scent of wildflowers, and birds called from the scattered trees lining the road. Levi rode beside her wagon, occasionally pointing out interesting features of the landscape or sharing stories of his travels. As they approached the outskirts of town, Eliza's grip tightened on the reins. "I should warn you, the reception might not be friendly. I'm not exactly popular here." Levi's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I've faced unfriendly receptions before, don't worry about me." The main street of Cottonwood Springs was busy with the usual Saturday morning activity, ranchers and townspeople alike coming in for supplies, women gossiping outside the general store, children playing in the dusty street. Conversations faltered as Eliza drove her wagon toward the hitching post in front of the mercantile, curious gazes shifting between her and her companion. Well, well," a voice called as they dismounted, "if it isn't our aspiring farmer." Mr. Fenton, the store owner, stood in his doorway, arms crossed. "Thought you might have given up by now, Miss Rose." "Not at all, Mr. Fenton," Eliza replied with forced pleasantness. "In fact, I'll need quite a few supplies today. We've just finished plowing all 5 acres. Fenton's eyebrows rose in surprise, his gaze shifting to Levi. "I see you found help. Didn't figure you for hiring hands." "Mr. Jackson has been kind enough to assist me temporarily," Eliza said, unwilling to explain the arrangement further. As they entered the store, whispers followed them like shadows. Eliza held her head high, presenting Fenton with her list of needed items: seeds, tools, foodstuffs, and other necessities. While the shopkeeper grudgingly filled her order, Levi wandered the store, occasionally adding items to their growing pile. "That'll be $12.43, Fenton announced when he'd tallied everything. Eliza reached for her purse, but Levi stepped forward. "I'll get the tools and my personal items," he said, placing coins on the counter. "That's not necessary," Eliza protested. "Consider it my contribution to the project," he said quietly. Their eyes met briefly, and something in his gaze made her acquiesce without further argument. As Fenton wrapped their purchases, the door opened, admitting Sheriff Thomas Wyatt, a heavyset man with a perpetually sour expression. "Miss Rose," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Heard you had some trouble out at your place." Eliza straightened. "Yes, Sheriff. The Henderson brothers fired warning shots and threatened me directly. I mentioned it to your deputy earlier this week." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Levi. "And you are Levi Jackson," he replied, meeting the lawman's stare evenly. "I witnessed their most recent threat myself." "Uh-huh." Wyatt scratched his beard. "Well, Miss Rose, without direct evidence, there's not much I can do. The Hendersons claim they were just hunting and you misinterpreted their presence." "Hunting?" Eliza's voice rose in disbelief. "They explicitly threatened to shoot me if I didn't sell my land." "It's your word against theirs," the sheriff said with a shrug. "And they've been respected ranchers in this county for 15 years. Levi stepped closer to the lawman. "So a woman's safety means less than a rancher's convenience in your jurisdiction?" Wyatt's expression hardened. "I don't know who you think you are, stranger, but I suggest you mind your own business. We handle our affairs in our own way here. When those affairs include threatening innocent women, perhaps your way needs reconsidering," Levi replied, his tone deceptively mild despite the steel in his eyes. The tension in the store crackled like lightning before a storm. Fenton cleared his throat nervously. "Your packages are ready, Miss Rose." Eliza quickly paid for her portion of the supplies. "Thank you, Mr. Fenton. We should be going now." Outside, she released a shaky breath. That could have gone better. Levi's jaw was tight as he loaded their purchases into her wagon. "The sheriff's in the Henderson's pocket. We won't get any help from him." "I never expected to," Eliza admitted, "but I had hoped for at least a pretense of impartiality." Their next stop was the bank, where Eliza deposited her remaining funds, a pitiful amount that would barely see her through until harvest, assuming there was a harvest to be had. As they exited the building, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, and at their center stood Clyde Henderson, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Got some city girl playing farmer with our water access, and now she's brought in some drifter to help her steal what rightfully belongs to honest ranchers." Levi tensed beside her. "We should go." "No," Eliza said firmly. "I'm tired of skulking away. This is my town now, too." Before he could stop her, she marched toward the gathering, head high and back straight despite the fear fluttering in her chest. Levi muttered something under his breath, but followed close behind. "Mr. Henderson," she called, causing the group to turn toward her. "If you have concerns about my property, I'd appreciate you addressing them to me directly rather than spreading falsehoods." Clyde's face reddened with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. "Well, look who's decided to join us, boys. Our very own would-be farmer." Several men chuckled, eyeing Eliza with expressions ranging from amusement to outright hostility. She recognized most of them as local ranchers or their hands. "I purchased my land legally," Eliza continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have no desire for conflict with you or anyone else, but I will not be intimidated into abandoning my property or my plans for it." "Plans," Clyde scoffed. "You think you can grow crops on that scrubland?" "Even with your hired gun helping?" He jerked his chin toward Levi. "This ain't the East, girl. Nature doesn't bend to fancy ideas or pretty faces out here." "Perhaps not," Eliza acknowledged, "but it does respond to hard work and proper techniques. The soil along the creek is fertile enough for certain crops, particularly with irrigation." One of the older men in the group, a weather-beaten rancher named Simmons, spoke up. "My father tried farming that stretch 20 years ago, lost everything to drought and pests." "Methods have improved since then," Eliza replied, "and I've selected crops suited to this climate and soil." "Listen to her," Clyde laughed. "Suddenly she's an expert on Arizona farming. Bet you never dirtied those hands before coming west, did you, Miss Rose?" Before Eliza could respond, Levi stepped forward. "I've seen the land. I've worked it alongside Miss Rose this past week. It's promising ground for the right crops with the right care." A murmur ran through the crowd. Levy's assessment, coming from a man clearly familiar with Western conditions, carried weight that Eliza's assertions did not. Clyde's expression darkened. "So you're not just protection, you're actually helping this foolishness?" "I recognize good sense when I see it," Levy replied evenly. "And courage too. Not many would stand against such opposition to pursue their vision." "Vision," Clyde spat, "more like delusion." An older woman who had been listening from the boardwalk stepped forward. "I think it's fine what you're trying to do, Miss Rose. This town could use more fresh produce. We're all sick of dried beans and preserved goods by winter's end." Several townspeople nodded in agreement, including the young schoolteacher and the blacksmith's wife. Eliza felt a surge of hope at this unexpected support. Clyde glared at the woman. "Stay out of this, Martha. You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand bullying when I see it," Martha replied tartly. "My herald would be ashamed to see how you're treating this young woman." The mention of the deceased former mayor caused Clyde to flush deeper. He pointed a thick finger at Eliza. "This isn't over. That land has been cattle passage for generations. One stubborn woman won't change that." With that, he shouldered his way through the crowd and stomped toward the saloon, his brothers trailing behind like shadows. The gathering slowly dispersed, though many cast curious or speculative glances at Eliza and Levy as they departed. Martha approached them, her lined face kind beneath her practical bonnet. "Don't mind Clyde. He's all bluster and bad temper since his wife left him last year." "Thank you for speaking up," Eliza said gratefully. "Someone should have done it sooner," Martha replied. "I'm Martha Thornton, by the way. My late husband was mayor here for 12 years. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thornton." Eliza introduced herself and Levy properly. "If you need anything, you come see me," Martha said. "I live just behind the church, and don't you let those Henderson boys scare you off. This town needs more independent thinking, especially from its women." As they drove back toward Eliza's farm, the encounter in town weighed heavily on both their minds. "I didn't expect anyone to support me," Eliza admitted. "People surprise you sometimes," Levy replied, "for better or worse." The implications of Clyde's threats weren't lost on either of them. The Henderson brothers wouldn't be content with intimidation much longer. If Eliza and Levy began planting, making a more permanent claim on the land, the conflict would escalate. "You should consider selling," Levy said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Not because I think you should give up, but because it might be safer." Eliza's hands tightened on the reins. "I won't be driven away by threats. It's not just threats I'm worried about." His voice was grave. "Men like Henderson don't stop at words when they're desperate." "This land is all I have," she said quietly. "Every penny I possessed went into purchasing it and the supplies to work it. If I sell now, even if the Hendersons offered a fair price, which they won't, I'd have nothing left to start over elsewhere." Levy was silent for a long moment. "Then we'd better make sure your first crop succeeds," he said finally. "Nothing silences critics like success." The word "we" lingered in Eliza's mind as they continued home. It had been a long time since she'd been part of any "we," and the comfort it brought was as unexpected as it was profound. The following weeks were filled with backbreaking labor from dawn until dusk. With the field plowed, they focused on creating irrigation channels from the creek, building a system of ditches and small wooden gates to control water flow to different sections of the field. Levy's knowledge proved invaluable, as he'd seen similar systems in California during his travels. They planted according to the plan. They developed together drought-resistant wheat in the upper field, corn along the creek where the soil was richest, beans and squash in the western section. Each night, exhausted but satisfied, they would discuss the next day's tasks over simple meals that somehow tasted better than any fancy Philadelphia dinner Eliza could remember. The Hendersons maintained an ominous silence during this time, though occasionally they would spot one of the brothers watching from the distant hills. Sheriff Wyatt rode by once, ostensibly checking on their welfare, though his skeptical assessment of their progress made his true purpose clear, reporting back to the Hendersons. As the first tender shoots of corn broke through the soil, Eliza felt a surge of pride and vindication. Each green sprout was proof that her vision wasn't merely a foolish dream. The wheat followed days later, transforming the upper field into a sea of delicate green blades swaying in the gentle breeze. "It's working," she whispered one evening as they stood at the edge of the field, watching the setting sun paint the young crops in golden light. "It's actually working." Levi smiled, his eyes reflecting her wonder. "Did you doubt it would?" "Yes," she admitted. "Despite everything, there were moments I feared everyone was right, that I was just a foolish woman chasing an impossible dream." "There's nothing foolish about believing in possibilities others can't see," he said softly. "That's called vision." Eliza turned to him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from his tall frame, of the way the fading light caught in his eyes. Something had been growing between them these past weeks, something as tender and promising as the shoots in her field. "Levi," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say, but feeling the need to acknowledge the unspoken connection. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the moment, the bullet kicking up dirt mere inches from their feet. Levi reacted instantly, pulling Eliza down and shielding her with his body as he drew his pistol. "Stay low," he ordered, scanning the surrounding hills. Another shot rang out, splintering wood on the fence post beside them. Keeping his body between Eliza and the direction of the shots, Levi half crawled, half dragged her toward the cabin. "Inside," he directed once they reached the relative safety of the porch. "Stay away from the windows." Heart pounding, Eliza complied, though every instinct screamed at her not to leave him exposed. Through the window, she watched as Levi took cover behind the water barrel, his pistol ready as he surveyed the landscape. No further shots came. After what seemed an eternity, Levi slowly made his way back to the cabin, entering cautiously. "I think they're gone," he said, holstering his weapon. "Cowards, shooting from hiding again." Eliza's hands trembled as the reality of what had just happened sank in. "They weren't aiming to miss this time." Levi's expression was grim. "No, they've decided to escalate." He took her hands in his, examining them as if to reassure himself she was unharmed. "Eliza, this is getting too dangerous. Those men are desperate." "Because they're seeing our progress," she realized. "The crops are coming in, we're proving them wrong, and they can't stand it." "This isn't about being right or wrong anymore," Levi said urgently. "It's about your life. They could have killed you just now." The fear in his eyes mirrored her own, but beneath it lay something deeper, a concern that went beyond the worry of one person for another's safety. It was the fear of losing someone precious, someone irreplaceable. "I can't leave," she whispered. "This is my home now, my future." Levi's hands tightened around hers. "Then we need to end this. No more waiting for them to make the next move." "What do you suggest?" "We ride into town tomorrow," he said decisively. "Speak to the sheriff again, but this time with witnesses, people like Martha Thornton who have shown support. Make it public that threats have escalated to shooting. Force his hand. And if that doesn't work," Levi's expression hardened, "then I'll have a private conversation with Clyde Henderson, man to man." The determination in his voice sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. "I don't want you risking yourself for me." "It's not just for you," he said quietly. "It's for us." The word hung between them, pregnant with meaning and possibility. Us, when had they become an us? Somewhere between plowing furrows and planting seeds, between shared meals and shared dreams, they had grown together like the crops in her field, natural, inevitable, right. Eliza stepped closer, her fear giving way to a different kind of tension. "You were supposed to be passing through," she reminded him softly. "Heading north, Montana, you said." "Plans change," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Sometimes you find something worth staying for." The distance between them vanished as Levi lowered his head, his lips meeting hers with gentle uncertainty. Eliza's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into the kiss, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. It was a tender exploration, a question and an answer all at once. When they finally parted, Eliza felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, as if the earth itself had realigned beneath her feet. "I should check the perimeter," Levi said reluctantly. "Make sure they're truly gone," she nodded, unable to form coherent thoughts just yet. As he moved toward the door, she found her voice. "Be careful," he glanced back, a smile touching his lips. Always. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. After a tense night during which Levi had insisted on standing watch despite Eliza's protests, they prepared to ride into Cottonwood Springs to confront Sheriff Wyatt and, if necessary, Clyde Henderson himself. "Remember," Levi cautioned as they approached the town, "our goal is to make this public. The sheriff can ignore one person's complaint, but he can't dismiss accusations made before witnesses." The sheriff's office was empty when they arrived, the deputy explaining that Wyatt had ridden out to investigate reports of rustling on the North Range. Instead of waiting, Levi suggested they speak with Martha Thornton and other potential allies first. They found Martha at her home behind the church, a neat white clapboard house surrounded by a thriving garden. The older woman welcomed them warmly, her expression growing concerned as they related the events of the previous evening. "Those Henderson boys have gone too far," she declared, setting down her teacup with a decisive clink. "Shooting at a woman on her own property, it's unconscionable." "The sheriff seems reluctant to intervene," Eliza explained. Martha snorted inelegantly. "Thomas Wyatt has been in the Hendersons' pocket since they helped finance his campaign, but he's not the only authority in this town." She rose from her chair. "Judge Wilson arrives tomorrow for the monthly circuit court. He's a fair man who won't be swayed by local influences. You should bring your complaint directly to him." Hope blossomed in Eliza's chest. "Do you think he would help?" "I know he would," Martha assured her. Harold always said Wilson was the most honest judge in the territory. Their next stop was the newspaper office, where the editor, a young man named Arthur Mills, listened with growing interest to their story. "This is exactly the sort of local injustice my readers should know about," he declared, scribbling notes as they spoke. "The abuse of power by wealthy ranchers against legitimate homesteaders strikes at the very heart of what's wrong with territorial governance." By midday, they had spoken with the minister, the schoolteacher, and several business owners, all of whom expressed outrage at the Hendersons' actions and promised to attend the judge's session to show support. The tide of public opinion seemed to be shifting in their favor, bolstered by the visible progress of Eliza's farm and the obvious tyranny of the Hendersons' tactics. As they left the general store, where even Mr. Fenton had grudgingly admitted that perhaps farming might have a place in the region's future, they nearly collided with Frank Henderson on the boardwalk. The middle Henderson brother staggered back, his hand automatically dropping to his holster before he recognized them. His eyes narrowed. "You two have some nerve showing your faces in town." "It's a free country," Levi replied calmly. "Miss Rose has as much right to be here as anyone." Frank spat into the dust. "Not for long, she don't. Clyde's mighty upset about you two ignoring our warnings." "Your warnings constituted assault with a deadly weapon," Eliza said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The judge will hear about it tomorrow." Something like uncertainty flashed across Frank's face. "Judge, what judge?" "Judge Wilson," Levi supplied. "I understand he takes a dim view of shooting at women." Frank's complexion paled slightly. "You got no proof it was us. We have witnesses to your threats," Eliza countered. "And Mr. Mills at the newspaper seems quite interested in the story." The mention of the newspaper clearly unsettled Frank further. The Hendersons, for all their bullying tactics, relied on a veneer of respectability in the wider community. Public exposure of their methods would damage their standing and possibly their business relationships. "Clyde's gonna want to hear about this," Frank muttered, pushing past them. Levi watched him hurry down the street. "That might buy us some time. They'll want to regroup before the judge arrives." Their return to the farm was tense but uneventful. No shots greeted them, no ominous figures watched from the hills. The fields stretched peaceful and green under the afternoon sun, seemingly untouched by the conflict that threatened their existence. As they tended to the irrigation channels and checked on the growing crops, Eliza found herself repeatedly glancing at Levi, remembering their kiss from the night before. Neither had mentioned it, the urgency of their situation taking precedence over personal feelings. but it hovered between them like an unspoken promise. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Eliza finally broached the subject that had been consuming her thoughts. "What happens after this is resolved?" she asked softly. "You mentioned Montana." Levi was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I've been thinking about that," he admitted, "about a lot of things." "And," she prompted when he didn't continue, he turned to her, his expression serious. "I've spent most of my adult life moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. It suited me, or at least I thought it did." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "But these past weeks with you, working this land, building something that might last. It's changed how I see things." Hope fluttered in Eliza's chest. "How so?" "I want to stay," he said simply. "If you'll have me, not just as a hired hand or a temporary ally, but as a partner in all things." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Levi, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other barely a month, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Eliza studied their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. "It is sudden," she agreed. "By Philadelphia standards, scandalously so." A smile tugged at her lips. "But we're not in Philadelphia, are we? Out here, perhaps it's more important to recognize what's real and hold on to it with both hands." Levi's eyes searched hers. "And what is real to you, Eliza Rose?" "This," she said, squeezing his hand. "Us. The way we work together, dream together, the farm we're building, a place that could become a true home." Relief and joy transformed his features. "Is that a yes?" "It's a let's see this through together," she clarified, "one step at a time. First, we deal with the Hendersons and secure our right to this land. Then we bring in the harvest and prove to everyone that farming here is viable, and then—" her smile widened. "Then we can discuss forever," he laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "A practical approach. I should expect nothing less from a woman who decided to farm in Arizona territory." As darkness fell, they retreated inside, their relationship fundamentally altered by the acknowledgement of their feelings, yet somehow unchanged in its essential nature. They were still partners, still allies, but now with the promise of something deeper binding them together. Morning brought clouds gathering on the western horizon, the first hint of possible rain in weeks. Eliza viewed them with cautious optimism as she and Levi prepared to ride into town for the judge's arrival. "A good omen, perhaps," she suggested, nodding toward the sky. "Let's hope," Levi agreed, though his expression remained concerned. "The Hendersons won't give up easily, rain or shine." They had just finished saddling their horses when the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Levi's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm as he stepped in front of Eliza. Around the bend in the road came Sheriff Wyatt, accompanied by Clyde Henderson and 4 other men Eliza didn't recognize. They rode slowly, deliberately, forming a line as they approached the yard. "Miss Rose," the sheriff called, reining his horse to a stop. "Mr. Jackson, we need to talk." Levi's posture remained tense. "Seems you brought quite a committee for a conversation, Sheriff." Wyatt's gaze flicked to the armed men beside him. "Just being cautious, I understand there's been some trouble." "Yes," Eliza stepped forward, refusing to be intimidated. "Mr. Henderson and his brothers have been threatening me and have twice fired shots at my property, most recently at Mr. Jackson and myself." Clyde's face darkened with anger. "That's a damned lie, we never—" "Enough," the sheriff interrupted. "That's not why we're here today." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew an official-looking document. "Miss Rose, I have here a writ signed by Territorial Judge Matthews authorizing the seizure of this property for unpaid taxes." Eliza felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Unpaid taxes. "That's impossible. I paid all taxes when I purchased the land. According to county records, there are 3 years of back taxes owed on this parcel," Wyatt continued impassively. "Until those are paid in full, plus penalties, the property reverts to territorial control." Levi stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This is fraud, and you know it. Judge Matthews isn't even on circuit in this region. Judge Wilson is due in town today." One of the strangers, a thin man in an expensive suit, spoke up. Judge Matthews signed this writ in Prescott 2 days ago at my request. As county assessor, it's my duty to ensure all properties are properly taxed. County assessor, Levi's eyes narrowed. I don't recall seeing you in town before. Mr. Hargrove travels throughout the county, Sheriff Wyatt explained smoothly. Now, Miss Rose, you have 24 hours to pay the amount due $342 or vacate the premises. The amount struck Eliza like a physical blow. It was far more than she had in the bank, more than she could possibly raise in a day, and everyone present knew it. This was no coincidence. It was a calculated move by the Hendersons to seize her land legally now that their intimidation tactics had failed. This is theft disguised as law, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Judge Wilson will hear about this. Clyde Henderson smiled coldly. Judge Wilson has been delayed. Telegraph came in this morning. Bridge washed out south of here. He won't arrive for at least a week. The perfect timing of this delay confirmed Eliza's suspicions. The Hendersons had orchestrated every aspect of this plot, from the fraudulent tax assessment to ensuring the one impartial authority who might intervene would be absent. You won't get away with this, Levi stated, his hand still resting on his holstered pistol. The sheriff's expression hardened. Careful, Jackson. Interfering with a lawful order is a serious offense. I'd hate to add charges against you to this unfortunate situation. For a tense moment, Eliza feared Levi might draw his weapon, precipitating a confrontation he couldn't possibly win against 6 armed men. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, feeling the coiled tension in his muscles. 24 hours, she said with as much dignity as she could muster. We understand. Sheriff Wyatt nodded curtly. Smart decision, Miss Rose. Mr. Henderson has generously offered to purchase your personal belongings and equipment at fair market value should you wish to sell before departing. How considerate, Eliza replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. As the men turned their horses and rode away, Clyde Henderson lingered behind momentarily. I told you this wasn't farming land, he said, satisfaction evident in his tone. Should have listened while you had the chance. Once they were alone, Levi's carefully controlled anger erupted. This is blatant corruption. That writ is almost certainly forged. The county assessor just happens to appear now after you've started gathering support in town. Eliza sank onto the porch steps, the magnitude of the situation overwhelming her. Even if it is fraud, how do we prove it? The sheriff is complicit, the judge is conveniently delayed, and we have 24 hours before they forcibly remove us. Levi paced the yard, frustration evident in every movement. We need to buy time. If we could delay until Judge Wilson arrives. $342, Eliza murmured, the impossible sum hanging between them. Even if I sold everything I own, it wouldn't come close. A thoughtful expression crossed Levi's face. Maybe we don't need the full amount, just enough to create a legal complication. What do you mean? If you make a partial payment and file a formal protest, they'd have to process that before proceeding with seizure. That might buy us the week we need until Judge Wilson arrives. Hope flickered to life in Eliza's chest. I have about $60 in the bank. Would that be enough? It's something, Levi said. And I have some savings as well, not enough for the full amount, but together we might make it significant enough that they can't simply dismiss it. He crouched before her, taking her hands in his. Eliza, we're not beaten yet, not by a long shot. His confidence bolstered her spirits. Rising to her feet, she squeezed his hands. Then let's go to town. We have a protest to file and allies to rally. The ride to Cottonwood Springs was tense but determined. As they approached town, they could see unusual activity, a crowd gathered outside the newspaper office, people speaking animatedly to one another. Something's happened, Levi observed as they dismounted in front of the bank. Inside, they found Martha Thornton engaged in heated conversation with the bank manager. She turned as they entered, her expression a mixture of outrage and determination. There you are. I was about to ride out to warn you. The whole town's talking about this so-called tax seizure. News travels fast, Eliza remarked. Especially when Arthur Mills prints a special edition, Martha replied, producing a still damp newspaper from her reticule. The headline blazed across the top. Corruption exposed. Henderson Ranch uses fraudulent taxes to seize homesteader's farm. Below was a detailed account of the situation, including quotes from several townspeople expressing support for Eliza and condemnation of the Hendersons' tactics. How did he know? Eliza asked, astonished. Frank Henderson has a loose tongue when he's been drinking, Martha explained with grim satisfaction. He was boasting at the saloon last night about how they'd fixed your wagon good and proper. Arthur's assistant overheard everything. The bank manager, a nervous man named Collins, cleared his throat. This puts me in a difficult position, Miss Rose. Sheriff Wyatt has already been in to inquire about your account balance. Levy's expression darkened. That's private information. He has no right. Perhaps not ethically, Collins admitted, but legally with a tax writ. We need to withdraw my funds, Eliza interjected. All of them. As Collins reluctantly processed her withdrawal, the door opened to admit Arthur Mills himself, his shirt sleeves rolled up and ink staining his fingers. Miss Rose, Mr. Jackson, just the people I was hoping to find. Judge Wilson is here. Eliza nearly dropped the money Collins had just handed her. Here, but the Hendersons said that a bridge was washed out, Arthur snorted. Pure fabrication. The judge arrived on the morning stage, right on schedule. He's reading my paper right now and has requested your presence at the courthouse immediately. Hope and fear warred within Eliza's chest as they hurried to the small territorial courthouse at the end of the main street. Inside, they found Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with steel gray hair and penetrating eyes, reading Mills' newspaper with evident displeasure. Miss Rose, I presume, he said as they entered. And Mr. Jackson, please be seated. They complied, joined moments later by Sheriff Wyatt, who entered looking distinctly uncomfortable, and Clyde Henderson, whose face was flushed with anger. Your Honor, Clyde began immediately, that newspaper account is full of lies, and I will speak, Mr. Henderson, not you, the judge interrupted coldly. Sheriff Wyatt, is it true that you served a writ of seizure signed by Judge Matthews on Miss Rose this morning? Wyatt shifted in his seat. Yes, Your Honor, the county assessor. I've already telegraphed Prescott, Judge Wilson cut in. Judge Matthews has been in Santa Fe for the past 2 weeks attending his daughter's wedding. He has signed no writs of any kind during that time. The color drained from Wyatt's face. I was given the document by Mr. Hargrove, the county assessor. I had no reason to question its authenticity. Interesting, since Mr. Hargrove died last month, the judge replied dryly. His replacement hasn't yet been appointed. Clyde Henderson surged to his feet. This is ridiculous. I was assured, he stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. Assured of what, Mr. Henderson? Judge Wilson asked with dangerous softness. That a fraudulent document would be accepted without question, that you could use the law as a weapon against a legitimate landowner. Your Honor, Eliza spoke up, I have documentation proving I paid all taxes when I purchased the property 3 months ago. She produced the papers from her reticule, handing them to the judge. Wilson examined them carefully. These appear to be in order. Sheriff Wyatt, you will return to Miss Rose's property immediately and remove the seizure notice. Mr. Henderson, you will remain here to answer charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. This is outrageous, Clyde blustered. I'm one of the most respected ranchers in the county. You can't, I can, and I will, the judge stated flatly. Your respect appears to have been purchased rather than earned, sir. Sheriff, if you wish to avoid sharing Mr. Henderson's cell tonight, I suggest you do as instructed without delay. As Wyatt hurried out, visibly relieved to escape further scrutiny, Judge Wilson turned his attention back to Eliza and Levi. Miss Rose, while I cannot undo the distress you've suffered, I can ensure it doesn't continue. Mr. Henderson and his brothers will be barred from approaching your property or interfering with your business in any way. Should they violate this order, they will face immediate imprisonment. Relief washed over Eliza like a cool rain after months of drought. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me, Wilson replied. Thank Mr. Mills and his newspaper. Without his timely intervention, this matter might have proceeded very differently. He glanced at the still fuming Clyde Henderson. Justice requires vigilance, particularly in territories where the law's reaches sometimes. Selective. As they left the courthouse, Eliza felt as though an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The gathered townspeople, many of whom had read Mills' special edition, offered congratulations and support. Several even expressed interest in purchasing produce once her crops matured, including Mr. Fenton, who grudgingly admitted that local vegetables would be a welcome addition to his store's offerings. "It seems we've won more than just the right to farm," Eliza observed as they rode home that afternoon. "We've won some acceptance, too." Levi smiled, the tension of the past days finally easing from his features. "People respect those who stand their ground, especially when they prove the doubters wrong." "We haven't proven anything yet," she reminded him. "The crops still need to come in." "They will," he said with certainty, "and we'll be here to harvest them together." The word "together" warmed Eliza more than the afternoon sun. As they crested the hill overlooking her farm, their farm now, in spirit if not yet in law, she marveled at how the land had transformed in just a few short weeks. The fields were a tapestry of green, the irrigation channels functioning perfectly, the cabin's garden bursting with vegetables. It was beautiful. It was home. That evening, seated on the porch watching distant lightning illuminate the western clouds, Eliza found herself contemplating the strange path that had led her here. From Philadelphia society to Arizona territory, from desperate gamble to promising reality, from solitary struggle to shared purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Levi asked, his arm resting comfortably around her shoulders. "How fortunate I am," she replied honestly. "A month ago I was alone, afraid, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. Now," she gestured toward the fields. "Now I have this and you," he drew her closer. "I'm the fortunate one. I've spent years wandering, never realizing what I was searching for until I found you." "Is that why you stopped that day, when you saw me struggling with the plow?" Levi considered the question. "Partly. You reminded me of my mother, fighting an unfair battle with such determination. But there was something else too, something I can't quite explain. It was as if something inside me recognized you, even though we'd never met." Eliza understood completely. She had felt it too, that inexplicable sense of rightness, of coming home, that had grown stronger with each passing day. "I love you, Eliza Rose," Levi said softly, the words simple yet profound in the gathering twilight. "I think I've loved you since that first day when you stood your ground and told me Benjamin was all you needed." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. "I love you too, more than I thought possible." Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the certainty of their feelings, the promise of their shared future. When they finally parted, Levi reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I've been carrying this for days, waiting for the right moment," he explained, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. Before she died, she told me to give it to a woman as strong as she was, but wiser in her choices." His eyes met Eliza's. "I can't imagine anyone more deserving." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "Are you asking?" "I am," he confirmed. "Marry me, Eliza, be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Let's build something lasting together, a farm, a family, a legacy." Joy bubbled up inside her, as fresh and clear as the creek water that nourished their fields. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to all of it." The band slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been made for her all along. Perhaps, in some way, it had been waiting through the years for this moment. This union, this promise of a future neither of them could have imagined just weeks ago. As the first raindrops began to fall, gentle, life-giving rain that their crops so desperately needed, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching nature bless their endeavors in the most tangible way possible. "They called me foolish," Eliza murmured against Levi's chest. "They were wrong," he replied simply, kissing the top of her head. And in that moment, with rain falling on thirsty fields and love blossoming in once lonely hearts, no truer words had ever been spoken. Autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold as Eliza and Levi harvested their first crops under a brilliant azure sky. The corn stood tall and proud, ears heavy with plump kernels. The wheat, though not as abundant as it might have been in more forgiving soil, had yielded enough to see them through the winter and provide seed for next year's planting. The beans and squash exceeded all expectations, thriving in the mineral-rich soil near the creek. Their wedding had been a simple affair held in Martha Thornton's garden 2 weeks after Judge Wilson's intervention. To Eliza's surprise, nearly half the town had attended, including Mr. Fenton and even the new sheriff, a no-nonsense former Army sergeant who had replaced the disgraced Wyatt. The Hendersons had faded from prominence after Clyde's arrest. Though he had eventually been released with a substantial fine rather than jail time, justice in the territories being somewhat flexible for men of means, his reputation had suffered irreparable damage. Frank and Wesley had sold their shares of the ranch and departed for California, leaving Clyde a diminished figure nursing his grudges in solitude. As Eliza loaded another basket of corn into their wagon, she paused to watch Levi working farther down the row. His shirt clung to his back, damp with honest sweat, his movements efficient and purposeful. Her husband. The word still sent a thrill through her even after 3 months of marriage. "Are you admiring the crop or the farmer?" he called, catching her gaze. "Both," she admitted with a smile. "They're equally impressive," he laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mrs. Jackson." The name change had been her choice, a symbol of their new beginning together. Eliza Jackson. It felt right, just as everything about their partnership felt right. "We should finish before sundown," she said, returning to her task. "Martha is expecting some of this corn for her preserving." Martha had become not just a friend but a surrogate mother to Eliza, offering advice on everything from crop storage to marital harmony. Her support had been invaluable during those first uncertain weeks of marriage, when Eliza and Levi were learning to navigate life as a couple rather than merely as farming partners. Not that the transition had been difficult. Their harmony in the fields translated naturally to harmony in the home. They worked together, dreamed together, loved together with a depth of connection that sometimes left Eliza breathless with gratitude. By late afternoon, the wagon was full to overflowing with their harvest. As they prepared to take a portion into town, a rider appeared on the road. Arthur Mills, the newspaper editor who had become a regular visitor and staunch supporter. "Good news," he called as he approached. "The Territorial Agricultural Board has accepted your invitation. They'll send representatives next month to observe your methods." Eliza clasped her hands in delight. "That's wonderful. If they endorse our approach, other farmers might follow our example." That had been Levi's idea, to document their techniques and results, to demonstrate that with proper methods and crop selection, farming in this region was not merely possible but potentially profitable. Arthur had published several articles about their progress, attracting attention from agricultural interests throughout the territory. "They're particularly interested in your irrigation system," Arthur continued, dismounting. The board chairman mentioned that similar approaches might be applicable in other arid regions. Levi nodded thoughtfully. "We've made some improvements since the summer. I'd be happy to share the designs." This willingness to innovate and share knowledge had earned them respect, even among the ranching community. Several smaller ranchers had approached them about techniques for growing supplemental feed crops, recognizing that diversification could provide security during drought years when grazing land suffered. As they drove into town with Arthur riding alongside, Eliza marveled at how dramatically her standing in the community had changed. Where once she had faced skepticism and outright hostility, she now encountered genuine interest and respect. Her foolish dream had become a promising reality that others wished to emulate. At Martha's house, they unloaded a generous portion of their harvest: corn, squash, beans, and some of the early apples from the small orchard they had started behind the cabin. "This is more than I expected." Martha exclaimed, surveying the bounty. "You two have worked miracles with that land." "Not miracles," Levi corrected gently, "just hard work and the right approach." After delivering produce to several other supporters and depositing a substantial quantity at Fenton's store, the merchant now paid fair prices. Having recognized the value of locally grown vegetables to his customers, they headed home in the golden light of late afternoon. "I was thinking," Levi said as they crossed the creek that marked the boundary of their property, "we should consider expanding next year." Eliza turned to him, surprised. "Expanding, the 5 acres is already a considerable undertaking for just the two of us." "True," he acknowledged, "but the Morales property adjoining ours to the east is for sale. 10 acres with good water access, if we combined our lands and hired help during planting and harvest seasons. We could double or triple our output," Eliza finished, seeing the vision taking shape. "But can we afford it?" Levi smiled. "With this harvest's profits and the money I've saved over the years, we could make a substantial down payment. The bank's more willing to lend now that we've proven the concept." The prospect both excited and daunted Eliza. Expansion meant greater risk but also greater potential reward. It meant committing even more deeply to this life they were building together. "We should consider it carefully," she said, ever practical. "Draw up the figures, evaluate the soil quality, plan the crop rotation." "Already started," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "The ledger is under our bed," she laughed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Of course it is. You've never been one to dream small, have you?" "Not anymore," he replied, his expression growing serious. "Not since I found something worth dreaming big for." As they crested the final hill, their farm spread before them in the evening light, the neat rows of harvested fields, the cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, the barn they had built together over the summer, the young fruit trees staked against the autumn winds. A home. Their home. "There's something else we should consider," Eliza said softly, her hand drifting to her abdomen in an unconscious gesture. "Something that might affect our expansion plans." Levi glanced at her, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension as he followed her movement. "Eliza, are you?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby come spring." The wagon lurched to a halt as Levi set the brake and turned to her, his expression a mixture of astonishment and pure happiness. "A baby, we're going to be parents." "Yes," she laughed, tears of joy springing to her eyes. "Around April, the doctor thinks." Levi gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, "more than I can ever express." "I know," she replied, nestling against his chest. "I feel the same." They remained that way for long moments, wrapped in each other's embrace as the setting sun bathed their land in golden light. Finally, Levi released her, though his hand remained protectively over hers on her still flat abdomen. "Does this change your thoughts on expansion?" he asked gently. Eliza considered the question. "Not necessarily. A child will need a secure future. Building something substantial to pass on seems even more important now." She smiled up at him. "Though I may be less help in the fields next summer than I'd planned." "We'll manage," he assured her. "Perhaps it's time to build that larger cabin we've discussed, with a proper nursery and room to grow." The thought warmed Eliza's heart. Their current cabin, while comfortable for two, would indeed be cramped with the addition of a child. A new home, built with their own hands for their growing family, seemed the perfect next step in their journey. "I'd like that," she said. "Though let's finish the harvest before we start new projects." Levi laughed, releasing the brake and urging the horses forward. "Always practical, my love. It's one of the many reasons I adore you." As they approached the cabin, Eliza leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, contentment filling every corner of her being. From the moment she had arrived in Cottonwood Springs, alone and determined despite her fears, to this perfect evening returning home with her husband and the promise of new life growing within her, it had been a journey she could never have imagined. They called me foolish, she murmured, echoing her words from that rainy night months ago when Levi had proposed, his arm tightened around her waist. They were wrong, he replied, completing their private ritual. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above their thriving farm, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that they had been wrong indeed. What appeared as foolishness to some was often courage to others, the courage to believe, to persevere, to love without reservation. That courage had brought her to this moment, this place, this man. And she would be forever grateful for the strength that had allowed her to follow her heart when all others counseled caution. For in doing so, she had found not just a farm or a husband, but a future brighter than any she could have dreamed. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The fields, freshly plowed and planted with Levi's strong hands while Eliza directed operations from the shade of a newly constructed porch, promised another bountiful season. The additional 10 acres they had purchased in the winter now stretched their farm to a respectable size, necessitating the hiring of 2 young men from town as regular help. Their new cabin, larger and more comfortable than the original, stood proudly at the heart of the property. Built over the winter months with assistance from neighbors who had once scoffed at Eliza's ambitions, it featured 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and the luxury of glass windows ordered specially from Prescott. As Eliza rocked gently in her chair, her hands resting on her greatly expanded middle, she watched Levi demonstrating proper planting technique to their new helpers. His patience and natural teaching ability impressed her, as did his obvious excitement about the impending arrival of their child. "He'll make a wonderful father," Martha observed from the chair beside her. The older woman had become a fixture at the farm in recent months, offering practical advice and emotional support as Eliza prepared for motherhood. "He already is," Eliza replied warmly. "You should see how he talks to the baby each night, telling stories about the farm and all his plans for teaching our child about growing things." Martha smiled. "Just like my Harold was with our boys, nothing more touching than seeing a strong man gone soft over a baby." A sharp twinge interrupted their conversation, making Eliza gasp and clutch her abdomen. It passed quickly but was followed by another several minutes later. "Martha," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I think it might be time." The older woman's expression shifted instantly from relaxed to focused. "How far apart are the pains?" "Not very," Eliza admitted, "but they only just started." Martha nodded decisively. "First babies often take their time, but we should get you inside and comfortable. I'll send one of the boys for Dr. Simmons." As they made their way inside, Eliza paused to call to Levi, who dropped his tools immediately upon seeing her expression. Within moments, the farm was a flurry of activity, one of the hired hands galloping toward town to fetch the doctor, Martha preparing the bedroom, Levi hovering anxiously at Eliza's side. "Are you certain it's time?" he asked, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "It's a bit earlier than we expected. Babies come when they're ready, not when we're expecting them," Martha chuckled, shooing him out of the bedroom. "Now go boil water and make yourself useful somewhere else. We'll call you when there's news." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination for Eliza. Dr. Simmons arrived promptly, his calm presence reassuring as the contractions intensified. Martha remained by her side throughout, offering encouragement and practical assistance, while Levi paced the main room, occasionally calling anxious inquiries through the door. As the afternoon faded into evening, Eliza's labor progressed steadily. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced, yet with each contraction, she reminded herself of all she had overcome to reach this moment: the loss of her parents, the journey west, the struggle to establish her farm against all opposition. This pain had purpose, bringing new life into the world she and Levi had created together. "You're doing wonderfully," Dr. Simmons encouraged as the moment of birth approached. "Just a little longer now." With a final, tremendous effort, Eliza felt her child slip into the world, the pain immediately replaced by the most incredible relief and anticipation. A girl, Martha announced joyfully as the baby's first cry filled the room. A beautiful, healthy girl. Tears streamed down Eliza's face as the doctor placed the tiny, squirming bundle on her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered, overwhelmed by the perfect miracle of her daughter. "We've been waiting for you." After the necessary cleaning and checking was complete, Martha opened the bedroom door. "Levi Jackson, come meet your daughter." He entered cautiously, his expression transforming from anxiety to wonder as he approached the bed where Eliza cradled their child. Sinking to his knees beside them, he gently touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling as her fingers instinctively curled around his. "She's perfect," he murmured, voice thick with emotion, "just like her mother. What will you call her?" Martha asked, her own eyes suspiciously moist as she watched the new family. Eliza and Levi exchanged a glance, having discussed this moment for months. "Hope," Eliza said softly. "Hope Grace Jackson, because she represents everything we've hoped for and all the grace that brought us together." "A beautiful name for a beautiful child," Dr. Simmons approved. "And a strong one, too, by the sound of those lungs." Indeed, little Hope seemed determined to make her presence known, her cries vigorous despite her slightly early arrival. As Levi carefully took her from Eliza's arms, cradling her with a tenderness that made Eliza's heart swell, the baby quieted, as if recognizing the safety of her father's embrace. "Hello, Hope," he whispered. "Welcome to our farm. One day, all of this will be yours, the fields, the orchards, the legacy your mother and I are building. But for now, all you need to know is that you are loved, so very loved." In that moment, watching her husband hold their daughter against the backdrop of the home they had created together, Eliza felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. From the ashes of her former life, something infinitely more precious had emerged, not just a farm or a marriage, but a family, a future, a place of belonging. As Martha and the doctor quietly departed, leaving the new family to their privacy, Eliza reached for Levi's hand, drawing him to sit beside her on the bed. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. His eyes, when they met hers, held such depth of emotion that words seemed unnecessary. Yet he answered anyway, his voice steady with conviction. "Beyond anything I could have dreamed," he said. "When I stopped that day to help a stubborn woman with her plow, I never imagined I was finding my whole world." Eliza smiled, exhausted yet radiant with joy. "They called me foolish," she reminded him, their private ritual now taking on new meaning with Hope's arrival. "They were wrong," Levi completed, bending to kiss her forehead tenderly. "So very wrong." Outside their window, the sun set on fields ready for growing, on a farm thriving against all odds, on a love story that had begun with determination, and blossomed into something as enduring as the land itself. And as darkness fell, 3 hearts beat as one in the home built by courage, sustained by perseverance, and now illuminated by the purest hope of all the promise of a new generation to carry forward the legacy of those who dared to believe when no one else would. They had called her foolish for wanting to farm, but as Eliza drifted to sleep in the safety of her husband's arms, their daughter nestled between them, she knew the truth: sometimes what appears as foolishness to the world is in fact the deepest wisdom of the heart. And in following that wisdom, against all advice and opposition, she had found not just success, but the most profound happiness imaginable: a family, a home, a future as abundant as the crops in their fields and as endless as the Arizona sky above them.